First of all, a couple of weeks ago, there was a very, very interesting, cute story that surfaced about an area where a whole lot of people had to go away. I'm not sure if it was coronavirus related or not, but people had to clear out a certain part of town. And the whole of the town was actually ransacked. It happened recently. Burglars, robbers went, guys, if you don't mind, if I ask again that people mute themselves, just so that we can prevent the background noises. See, a couple of people still are not unmuted. Thanks. Okay. So these people all went away. They were away from that place. It happened to be a Chabad rabbi who also left for the while. I'm not sure if it had to do with coronavirus. I don't know the exact details of the story, but the part of the story that is relevant is that when they came home, everybody's houses had been burglarized, that they'd all been burgled, with the exception in the whole area of the rabbi's house, or the Chabad house. And the police were a bit baffled by it. And of course, it leads to all sorts of suspicions. But eventually, when they managed to round up the robbers and they caught them, they asked them the question, why did you go through everybody's house except for that one? And they said, well, that one had a security system on the door that we had never come across. There was everybody else's security systems we know how to work around. The beams, the lights, the this, the that, the cameras. When it came to this little thing that's on the door, we didn't know how to work around it. We don't know what it is. And our experts in our team were afraid to take a chance, and so we didn't go near the house that had that thing on the doorpost. Obviously, what was it? A Mezuzah. So now, when we think about the idea of a Mezuzah, I was recently putting up Mezuzot at somebody's house, and you have a number of interesting things that come up in a modern home as to exactly where a Mezuzah should be placed. Do you put the Mezuzah on the right-hand side of the doorpost going in always? Or do you sometimes put it on the other side? Because the ultimate question that sometimes has to come up is, what is in and what is out? Now, when you're talking about a front door, it's pretty simple. You walk up to the front door, no matter which way you look at it, the right-hand side going in is very clearly defined. But what about when it's between rooms? What about when it leads from the garage into the house? What about when it leads from the front room, let's call it, onto the garden? Which side is in and which side is out? Now, it also used to be a lot simpler when you were talking about all the doors being swinging doors. Because here, very often, people could say, or there was one definition, certainly brought by a great sage by the name of the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, says that we go, doesn't matter whether it's you defining it as in or out, but what about just defining it by the swing of the door? That we say that a door always swings into a room. So if you're asking yourself what's in and what's out, look at the way that the door points. If the door swings into the room, that's called in. And sometimes, of course, builders sometimes have a sense of humor. And sometimes going into a room, they put the door swinging out. If you have such a door, it's time to get a new builder, I think. But sometimes it swings the opposite direction. The Alter Rebbe would say we always put it according to the swing of the door. Today, modernity has it that a lot of doors are sliding doors. A lot of doors don't swing at all. So which way do you do it? Well, perhaps the way to think about it in your head is going from your front door, what would you have to do first? If you went from your front door, which is like into the house, you would probably first go out of a certain door rather than in. And therefore the out, if you wish, is the first in. And that would define where the mezuzah has to go. So there's a lot of interesting questions that come up about the position of mezuzahs on doorposts. However, the one thing that everybody is clear on is that, and we say it 3 times a day in our Shema, is that we've got to put mezuzot on the doorposts of our house, and that's on all doorposts other than rooms that are made for bathing or dressing. Those areas do not get mezuzot. Otherwise, every room needs a mezuzah. And it also has to be on sha'arecha. It's got to be on your gates. The mezuzah needs to be on the doorposts as well as on the gates. Now, a gate, once again, would have to be a gate that has the definition of a doorway. So it's got to have 2 doorposts, and it's got to have a lintel over the top. If it's just a sliding gate that has nothing over the top when you go through it, it doesn't need a mezuzah. And so we have to define what our doorposts are and what are our gates. When we think about it, everybody agrees that the mezuzah must be in the doorway, whether it's on the door, the doorpost, or it's on the gate. It's in the doorway. Nobody says the mezuzah should rather be here, stand on the wall in the middle of the room. You know what? This is a holy room, and why argue about whether it's in or whether it's out? What about just put it inside the room? And the inside of the room now will be, if there's any holiness that the mezuzah conveys, it will do it inside that room, and that will become a holy room. No, Jewish law says that the mezuzah dafka has to be on the doorways and on your gates. There's something significant about it, because it has got to do with our going in and our going out, and it's got to do with inside and outside. The mezuzah is this magical security system, if you wish, but it's much more than that. It gives us this big awareness of inside and outside. It's not just in, it's in and out. And we therefore are told that if you have a good mezuzot on your doorposts, they protect you. Although the reason we put up mezuzot in Torah does not say that it's about protection. It's not. It's just that we're told to do it. There's something about, as we spoke about last week, creating an environment and an awareness. That awareness and that environment has to be there when you're going out and when you're coming in, and when you're inside and when you're outside. And therefore, that protection from the mezuzah is there for you when you're inside the house as well as when you're outside the house. So a lot of people have felt, when I travel, maybe I must take a mezuzah with me. Jewish law would say not. The mezuzah on your door at your house protects you inside and outside. No matter how far you travel from that door, that same mezuzah covers you. You've got that protection. It's yours. It's a protection that covers you in all spheres and in all places. I'll share with you a very personal story just as a beginning here. And that is something that was maybe a little bit eerie, but I'm not sure if we even have thought about it. But I want to bring you a little bit of a proof from the Lubavitcher Rebbe of the fact that your mezuzot work in this life as well as in the next. And that's going to be the following little personal story. And that was at the time that my late father took ill. And he took ill one day, unfortunately, and was gone the next. He literally was sick for 24 hours, even less. And it was a big shock to us and very sudden. He was a young man, etc., etc., etc. But shortly before he passed away, I had contacted the office of the Lubavitcher Rebbe to tell him that my father wasn't well. And he immediately responded that we should check the mezuzot and his tefillin. Now, I had called a colleague to come to the house, my parents' house in Pretoria, and he took down all the mezuzahs immediately and put up new ones. And he had called me to tell me that the mezuzot were all up on the house.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. Thank you.
Okay.
Unmute yourself.
That. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go. So the mezuzot were all up on the house, new mezuzahs. So I'd gone even better. I'd put up new mezuzahs in the house. And it was a big house, there were a lot of doors. And he called me to tell me that the mezuzot were all up. And as soon as he told me that, I went back into my father's room and he'd passed away. So me making my own kind of decisions and not really thinking beyond it. We've had a very short shiva, and we then came, it was Yom Tov straight afterwards. It was towards the end of the month of Elul. And right after Yom Tov, I had sent in for the Rebbe's overview and an approval, the text that we wanted to use on my father's tombstone. And the Rebbe answered on that. And then he said to me, Mosa yedieni al dvar b'dikas hatfilin v'mezuzah sheloi. Which means, when are you going to tell me about the checking of the mezuzahs and tefillin of your father? It was a bit shocking, a bit scary. I didn't quite know what that was about, but I ran straight away to get the mezuzahs checked and the tefillin checked, and gave the Rebbe a full report. The Rebbe never answered or said anything else about that afterwards. When asking more senior colleagues, etc., about this very, very strange occurrence, I thought, they explained that it was not unusual, that from the Rebbe's point of view, the mezuzah is not only a protection in this world, but it's a protection in the next as well. The fact that you have kosher mezuzahs here doesn't only last as long as you're inside. Somebody's still unmuted. I'm getting a reverb there. If you don't mind, mute yourselves. Let's go. Sharon, I think it's you. Cher? She's on mute. No? Sorry. So get a feedback when I talk. Sorry. It's still happening. Maze. Let's go. I may have cured the problem. Okay. So the concept of the mezuzah is it's a protection in this world and it's a protection in the next. Why I bring up the concept of mezuzot today is because we have that word in the beginning of this parsha, this week's parsha, sha'ar. Sha'ar meaning a gateway. We know it from the Shema. Uktavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisha'arecha. You should write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. There is a word used about a sha'ar in the beginning of this week's parsha, where it tells us, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol sha'arecha. Now look at the words. Shoftim v'shotrim, which means judges and policemen. Titen lecha, you, singular, must place b'chol sha'arecha, on all your gates. You need to have judges and policemen at all your gates. Now, what does it mean to have judges and policemen at all your gates? Mefarshim tell us that number one is it's obligatory on a society to have a proper system of justice. And a proper system of justice means that you've got to have an effective judiciary and you've got to have an effective police force. If you've got an effective judiciary without an effective police force, you don't stand a chance of keeping your criminality down. If you have a good police force without a system of justice, your police can get carried away and do whatever they want to do. You've got to have this balance of a proper justice system, which is made up of judges and policemen. You need the judiciary, but you need the judiciary to have what they call in legal terms, I guess, the judiciary has to have teeth. They have to have the ability to enforce the law. The judges can't carry out the sentence. The judges can't police that people will behave. The judges have to be there as a judiciary, and the policemen have to do, it's two separate roles. The policemen have to do their job. One without the other, you've got a failed system. Doesn't work. Your legislature is useless. And we need to have both of these things in order for it to be effective, in order for it to be proper. So that's one lesson. Lesson number 2 is the fact that this is judges and policemen have to be for you. In other words, it doesn't matter what society has. You have to have, as a Jew, as Jews, we have to live in an environment which has a proper judicial system. And when we have that judicial system, that justice system, a Beth Din, for instance, we've got to utilize it. We can't go running to the outside courts. We've got to use our own courts. We've got to bring our matters to our own judges and policemen. It's got to be done in such a fashion. There's a further point to be made. And that's that later on in the parsha, there is a whole piece, a whole section of this week's parsha, which talks about the justice system in an unusual fashion. And that was the concept of the cities of refuge, which have been taken by most to sort of be the prototype of a prison system. But in fact, it was very much the prototype of a rehabilitation system. Because when we think about the cities of refuge, Moshe Rabbeinu is told, Moses is told, cities of refuge have to be established. How do these cities of refuge work? What are they? Well, they were places, and it's called a city. It's not like we have Lahavdil Elf Avdolis, the Joburg prison is called Sun City. I've heard many theories as to why it was called Sun City. I think it probably the most plausible is I think it was built at about the same time as Sun City. And they said, you know, there's a big construction going on there and another one big there. And somehow it got the name Sun City. Others say it's because 90% of the inmates spent all the time in the sun. And the other one was that at the time that it was built, they spoke about it being luxurious. I promise you it's not luxurious. I promise you don't want anybody to ever have to go there. It's not fun, as I'm sure that others who have been there, like Edna, could testify to the fact that it's not fun there. But be that as it may, it's not really a city. The concept of a city of refuge was that it was a whole city with a proper infrastructure, that a person who had to go there would move there entirely with his whole family. And even, as the Rambam teaches us, he had to take his teacher with him. So teachers had to go. If he had a rabbi who was his teacher, the rabbi had to go there too. So his whole infrastructure had to go. But who else inhabited these cities of refuge? It wasn't only people who were criminals, or people who were... I'm not sure what you mean. Or people who were awaiting trial. It was also a place where a whole lot of priests were sent. Leviim, Kohanim, priests were sent to the cities of refuge. Now, what was their role there? Well, they had to provide a spiritual infrastructure. You couldn't take people away from their spirituality. You couldn't take them away from their kedusha, from their holiness. If we wanted to have these cities of refuge working properly, they had to have an ability to learn Torah. They had to have an ability to daven with a minyan. They had to have an ability to have kedusha, to have a holiness that surrounded them. Because as we spoke about last week, we had to create an environment within which they could be rehabilitated. If we weren't creating that environment of rehabilitation, we completely lost the plot, because Judaism has as a basic, and this comes back to our idea of Jewish judges or Torah judges and policemen, is that the whole idea of the system was that it was not punitive. We weren't trying to exact a pound of flesh here. We weren't trying to get our own back, and nor were we necessarily trying to protect society. In fact, the whole system seems to be based around the protection, in inverted commas, of the criminal, in inverted commas. And what was that? That a person had an ability to go to a place to be rehabilitated. Because what is the focus of Jewish justice? The focus of Jewish justice is on the soul of the individual who we understand maybe, and we're really talking predominantly about anybody who can be rehabilitated. From a Jewish point of view, rehabilitation is when we've done things that was not completely intentional. We're not going to talk about intentional at the moment, but not completely intentional. What does that mean? We term it to be shogeg. Shogeg means that a person did it without intending. So he killed somebody without the intention. It would be 90% of the cases, even of murder, that a person would be sent to the city of refuge. Why does such a person? So it's almost as though the person is found that he didn't have intention, therefore he can't be found guilty of capital murder or whatever it's called, and therefore he should be let go free. No, we send him to a city of refuge because he needs rehabilitation. There is something on his soul, there's a blemish on his soul that needs to be fixed in this way. We're focusing on helping him, on protecting him, on getting him right. And the only way we can do that is by creating an environment within which he can be fixed. That's the focus of this system of justice. Now, this is a far cry from systems of justice around the world, where the penal system, the punitive system of putting a person into prison is for punishment or to save society from them. Those things are not part of this idea here. Yes, the parsha also deals with, of course, and there's, so does Torah in many places, that people could be put to death that believed in a death penalty in certain cases. But we're not going to talk about that. We're talking about the idea of the cities of refuge as being a defining feature of what our systems of justice were actually all about. It was about helping the neshama. It was about helping the soul. It was about fixing that soul. It was about enabling that soul to get the help that it needed so that one day it could be properly reintegrated into society and that it comes through clear and beautiful and pristine. And of course, our sages have pointed out that the city of refuge is an analogy, or the other way around, it's a metaphor for the month of Elul. Today is Rosh Chodesh Elul, and we have just stepped into this, in inverted commas, city of refuge. It was labeled that way by the great sage Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the Arizal, who told us that the words Elul stands for Ina leyado v'samti lecha. In the rules of a city of refuge, it says an accident came into your hand, and I've placed for you a place where you can take refuge. Ina leyado v'samti lecha spells Elul, the first letter of those words. What does it mean? That the city, this place, like Elul, or Elul, like the city, is a place where we can work on ourselves, where we can gain the cleansing that we need, where we can fix the faults, where we can rectify the difficulties, we can iron out all the cracks and creases and bumps that have developed on our neshamas and our souls, and we can gain that exoneration, that purification, so that we are ready for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur when they come along. Now, going back in Jewish history, on this day, if you want to reflect back over 3,300 years ago today, this morning, what was happening? Believe it or not, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, was starting to climb the mountain. He was climbing up Mount Sinai, and this was going to be the time that he would return with the Torah that would last forever. Remember, he came back with the first set of tablets, and he had to break them because the Jewish people had worshipped a golden calf. So his 40 days ended with the smashing of the tablets. This was the second time that he went to get the 10 Commandments. This one he had to hew for himself. But he spent 40 days and 40 nights up on the mountain. And he went up on Rosh Chodesh Elul today, or rather it would be tomorrow morning, the 1st of Elul. He went up tomorrow, and he told them, sound the shofar, blow the shofar so you remember that this is the time that I'm leaving. And he came back on Yom Kippur. He returns on Yom Kippur with the tablets that he had hewn for himself, but that God had instructed exactly how it should be done, and the whole Torah and so on. So it was 40 days of a time that is called an Eit Ratzon. This is a time of God's will. God's will. In other words, if you think about the best stuff that you could wish for, this is the time to ask for it. This is the time to go for it. And we're talking about not physical stuff, we're talking about spiritual stuff. This is the time to work on ourselves. This is the time to get that opportunity that we have right now for tshuva, for return, for repentance, for fixing, for cleansing, much like these cities of refuge. But let's perhaps look at this whole thing in a more personal fashion. You know, everything that is done in a big way from a Jewish point of view is mirrored in a small way in a human point of view. You know, when the Mishkan was built, it was supposedly built, the tabernacle was built, and the temple was built. It was meant to, in a way, mirror or be like the body of a human being. Was the outer and the inner, and eventually getting sort of to the essence, to the Holy of Holies, to the brain, if you wish. There was a certain similarity to that. But so too, when we have anything that's of a communal level or a broader Jewish level, so it always has a meaning and a message for us personally. So how do we read then this instruction of Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol sha'arecha? What does it mean when we talk about doing this at all our gates? Well, we can immediately between sha'arecha that is mentioned here, where we know that predominantly in ages of old, the justice system was at the gateways. It was at the gates. You know, if you read all the biblical stories about people coming, whether it was the time of Yehuda and Tamar and so on, they go to the elders who were sitting at the gates. Why was it at the gates? The gates was a place of not only of where trade took place, but it was a place where things had to be decided. I guess you have excise and customs and immigration and so on. What are we going to let in? What are we going to let out, etc. It was the best place to set up your justice system, and that's where the judges actually sat. It was always at the gateways where the elders sat and they paskin, they made these decisions. But the mirror of it in your own home is you need systems of justice and policing in all your gates as well. Not just what will be allowed in, but also what will be allowed out. What kind of example is your home going to set? What kind of image are you giving off to outside, as well as what are you going to bring into the home? So we need to make sure that we bring into the home our good values, that there are mitzvahs that are done in the home, that there are wonderful things that happen inside that home. But then the home becomes a reflection or a symbol of all the stuff that has to be carried outwards as well. It's about passing through that gateway, sha'arecha. And maybe this is where the Mezuzah also has an influence. It's not just a hechsher. It's not just a bet din stamp on the fact that anything that comes out of this house or anything that goes in is kosher, but it's maybe a reminder to the fact that we've got to see that anything that comes in and everything that goes out is kosher. And of course, we're not only referring to food, but we're talking about language and atmosphere and human relationships and tzedakah and all of those things, the in and the out are of great importance and great relevance as well. But perhaps if we drill down a little bit more and we think about the fact that this instruction is given lecha, it's given to you as an individual. It's given lecha. Lecha means to you. And that means you or me, to each individual. We also have to have shoftim v'shotrim b'chol sharecha. We need systems of justice which have to have all the things of the same balance, fairness, kindness, focus that all our systems of justice have to have out there in the big, great, wide, beautiful, wonderful world. We've got to have it within ourselves as well. And some of our Mefarshim beautifully point out that if you take a look on your own face, you have several sha'ars. We have several gateways. There are the gateways of your eyes. There are the gateways of your nose. There's the gateways of your mouth, your ears. We've got these gateways right here on our dial. And those gateways need shoftim v'shotrim. They also need judges and policemen. Let's make a couple of suggestions. What does it mean, judges and policemen? B'chol sharecha, because once again, we've got to remember that the fact that they are determined by our sages and depicted as being gateways, we're talking about in and out. It's not just about the in, and it's not just about the out, but it's the in and the out. And what do I mean? You know, there was a group of people who founded a new religion a couple of thousand years ago. They called it Christianity. And one of the things that they planted into their supposed, having been said by their leader, was that it's not what goes in the mouth that counts, it's what comes out. And with that, they got rid of kashrut. Kashrut was out the window in one fell swoop, as they would say. Why? Because it's only about what you say rather than about what you eat. Torah says, not true. It's about what you eat because it's about what you say. And it's about what you say because it's about what you eat. We've got to remember that every mitzvah has an influence on our behavior. And the fact is, if we're being careful that we're eating in a refined way, that is going to determine that we will speak in a refined way. And if we're careful that we are eating in a refined way, that will be mirrored in the fact that we will behave in a refined way. We don't really know the meaning or the actual influence of each of the mitzvot, but we do know that when we take them on board, when we do them, when we're involved in them, they work on every part of our being, of our soul and our body to make us more refined, to make us more respectful, to make us more respected, and to make us more in tune with what it was that God wanted from us, which was to be great and incredible citizens of our families, of our communities, and of our entire world. So it's not just what goes in, but it's also what comes out. And it's not just what comes out, but it's also what goes in. And we could use the same thing for any part of these sha'arim, of these gateways. We've got to think about. Torah tells us, don't speak lashon hara. But it also tells us, don't listen to lashon hara. You can absorb through your ear stuff that is bad for you, that comes from the outside. What about sight? We can prevent ourselves from seeing certain things, but we've got to be careful that we don't have things that are of a nature whereby they influence our behavior and perhaps influence our souls in a negative way. It's not right, it's not correct, it's not good for people, for anybody to see images that are dangerous, harmful. You know, sometimes they put up disclaimers. If you go onto certain pictures on the internet or on a website or whatever, they say, you know, it could be harmful to sensitive viewers. From a Torah point of view, your neshama is a sensitive viewer. Your neshama has got a sensitivity. And when it looks at certain things, it can be damaged by those things. The same way as there's an indelible impression that's left on your brain when you see something that's harsh, that's tough, that's difficult, that's gruesome, and so on. It leaves an impression inside your head. These are our gateways. And we've got to make sure that what comes in is pure, clean, not harmful to children or men or women, and that it's actually something that is going to be positive, that it's going to influence us in a positive way as well. But have you ever thought about the fact that even your eyes have an outward thing as well? Yes, from your eyes, although we always talk about the fact that light shines out of your eyes, but really what does come out of your eyes is the way you look at things. It's not just about what you see, but it's also the out is the way you look at things. And everybody looks at things differently. But so we're not just talking about, I was thinking about it today, I think that they've done all sorts of experiments and examples that they use. You draw a round black circle on a page, on a white page, and you say to one individual, what do you see? And they say they see a black dot with white all around it. Say to another person, what do you see? Say, I see a white page with a black dot on it. It depends on your focus. Sometimes some of us are gifted to be able to only see faults, and some of us are gifted to be able to only see good. And Torah is telling us to look at everything in a good fashion, look at everything in a positive fashion, in a positive light, find the meaning behind stuff, understand why it is that people behave in certain ways that they do behave. They're not out to get you. They're not trying to hurt you. Some people, the moment they open their mouths, you think that they're fighting with you, that they're criticizing. Maybe put into the background there's something that Torah tells us in a system of justice. Al tadines chaverecha ad shetagia limkomo. It says in Pirkei Avos, in Ethics of Our Fathers, do not judge your fellow man until you've been in his place. What does it mean to be in his place? Doesn't mean just, what do they say, walk in his moccasins. Doesn't mean just to walk in his shoes. What it actually means is you've got to go and investigate his place. Look at the way he was raised. Look at his family. Look at the influences on his life. Look at the things that he went through. Look at the difficulties that he's battling with. And you'll come to the conclusion that, you know what, you possibly would have behaved a lot worse had you been in his position or her position. In other words, see things favorably. Speak kindness. It's not just about what goes in, it's what comes out as well. Hear things kindly. And perhaps we've got to think about the idea of breathing in a certain air. Here I want to just tell you a story that I may have mentioned to you before. And that was many years ago, in the time that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was sitting on his balcony in New York. He wasn't well. He was in a wheelchair. And he was on the balcony. And a fellow came to shul that day. And he came to his son-in-law, who then became the Rebbe, to our Rebbe. And he said to him, I just saw your father-in-law getting fresh air. And the Rebbe said to him, my father-in-law doesn't get fresh air. He makes the air fresh. We as Jews have to think about the fact that it's not just, and I think we've all become very sensitive to our breathing over these days when we've had to wear masks. For the very first time today, had the privilege of having our first minyan in a long time, and opening up the shul and having a minyan. The one thing that nobody warned me about was because I davened. When you daven and you've got a mask on, it gets quite difficult. You battle to breathe a little bit. You got to learn how to breathe again. So yes, in this new coronavirus age, we've got to learn how to breathe again. But we've also got to understand that from a spiritual point of view, we can't only breathe in through our nostrils, our mouth, etc., but we can also, I want to put it nicely, breathe out. It's not just that we breathe out, and God forbid that it's carbon dioxide or bad breath, but rather that we are breathing air into the environment, which creates a positive energy and gives us all the wherewithal to be able to do good, to continue, and to make our world a much, much better place. So, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol sha'arecha. It's not just defined by the judges and policemen that we need in a community or a society. It's not just defined by the judges and policemen that you need on the doorposts of your house to make sure that your home is run on proper sound principles, morals, ethics, and so on. But it's also about you, about each individual. And perhaps as we drill down and we come into the individual is in many ways the most difficult of them all to deal with. A lot of people, and throughout history, and it's not just you or me or us or whatever, a lot of people find it quite easy. Say, yeah, we can set up the justice system, and we can have a great constitution, and we can have all the rules and regulations in place, and so on. And yes, even in theory of how we're going to run our homes, that can be brilliantly set up as well. But the most difficult job, I think, is working on myself. It's working on me. It's making sure that I am well policed, because we sometimes forget about that, and we don't. Not only forget about it, but it's the most difficult to really be self-critical and really self-introspect and really take people's criticism, obviously well-meaning, to take it and to make it something that you cherish rather than that you hate, is often very, very, very difficult. And you think, well, you know what, living in a dream world, it would be possible, but it's not always that possible. We've got a big thing called an ego that runs against it. We've got a big thing called a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination that runs against it. But maybe that is truly and really the message of this parsha and this month that we're going into today, the month of Elul. And that is that we've got to use similar kind of balanced judgments with all of these things. So on the one hand, I've got to be self-critical, and I've got to work on myself, and I've got to fix the things that need fixing. On the other hand, I've got to be fair to myself. I've got to be fair to myself and say, hey, 1 second. Not only do you have a precious godly soul that God gave to you, but you've done a lot. You've done mitzvahs. You've done good things. And the way that our sages termed this period of time is to make what they called a cheshbon hanefesh, to make an accounting of your soul. We've got to do our books, our spiritual books. Now, in spiritual books, if you just show credits, you're not getting a fair reflection of the business. If you just show debits, you're also not getting a fair reflection of the business. You've got to have the credits and the debits. And the one thing we don't do, by the way, I don't think, is we don't say that the one wipes out the other. We don't say, well, I've done so much good and so much bad or whatever, canceled out, and so I'm starting from square one. No, you've got a lot to be proud of. You've got a lot that's in your favor, and at the same time, you've got a lot that each and every one of us needs to look at and needs to just make a little bit better. And this perhaps is the deep message here that we have of Shoftim v'shotrim. We've got to have the judgment. We've also got to have the policemen who carry out the judgment. So it's all very well to say, oh, I've identified that I've got this issue. I don't look at people favorably. But then if I go to sleep and I do nothing about it, well, what was the point even of making the discovery? I wasted the time of the court. I wasted the time of the judgment. What did I do it for? It's got to go hand in hand. There's got to be the finding and the action. There's got to be the fault and the fixing, or the good thing and the realization of the fact that it could be a little better, that it was good enough, and so on. But all of these things need accounting during this beautiful month of Elul. So in conclusion, wishing you a good Chodesh, a Chodesh Tov. Remember that this is the beginning of Moshe Rabbeinu's ascent of the mountain. We too are beginning our climb up the mountain. I'm sure that that's why they call the festivals at the end of it all the high holy days, because we've got to reach up. We've got to get to the top of the mountain for the high holy days. They're high, they're mighty, they're beautiful, and we need to get our mindset right here, that we're getting into it. Societal, communal, home, and of course individual. And when we think about all of that, and we place all of these judges and policemen at all our gates, we've got real mezuzot that can protect us here in this world and in the next. And please God, we will very, very soon see a return to the proper justice system of the Jewish people with the coming of Mashiach now. And I wish you all a good Shabbos.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Katz. Good Chodesh.
A good Chodesh to everybody. Take care. Thank
To
you.
you and to
Rabbi.
everybody.
Look forward to seeing you again next week, please God.
Please God. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebbe.
Well,
Shabbos, everybody, and good
Shabbos,
Chodesh.
take care.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, and thank you, and all you wish yourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep well, everybody. Take care.
You too.
Thank you,
You're
Rabbi.
lovely.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good Shabbos, Kodesh.
Shabbos, good Chodesh.
Good Shabbos, Rebbe.
Shabbos, Edna.